What was the scariest we need to leave now moment that you've ever had? My wife was about a month out from the due date for our first child. Something didn't seem right to her, and she wanted to go in to get checked. I immediately drove her to the hospital. The baby's heart rate dropped really low suddenly, and they did an emergency C-section. He came out APGAR 1, pass, looked exhausted and wouldn't raise his arms, and was in the NICU for 8 days, many of them under an oxygen hood. Right after he was born, the anesthesiologist said to us that he might be disabled. I have never been so scared in my life, worried that we would lose him. Many years later, he is in college now, and perfectly healthy, thankfully. My wife was in a room recovering for several days and was unable to see my son in the NICU. Every day I would visit my son in the NICU, and then go visit my wife. On the third day, I brought her a framed photo of him from his first hour in this world so that she could see him from her hospital bed. She broke down in tears. On the fourth day, he was out of the oxygen hood, and I got to hold him for the first time. I brought my wife down to the NICU in a wheelchair later that day, and she saw him in person for the first time since his birth. When the nurse said, "Would you like to hold him?" she burst into tears again, sobbing tears of joy. It was quite an emotional time. Story 2. Not quite a leave, but I was living in Kansas. My boyfriend and I were sitting on a friend's front porch when cops came flying up the street, slammed on the brakes, and yelled, "Get the duck in the house!" We did. Our friend wasn't home, but thankfully, the door was unlocked. Turned out, there was a man walking around shooting anything that moved. We didn't know this at first. This was around 2002, so we didn't have the net in our pockets. Our friend came home maybe an hour later and told us what was going on. Not long after, there was commotion in the backyard. It was the guy with the police on his tail. They arrested him a few feet from the back door. Story 3. I was at the fair with my wife and 6-year-old daughter. From the moment we arrived, I had the feeling we shouldn't be there. I can't explain it beyond a feeling in the pit of my stomach that was telling me this wasn't the place for us. I told my wife, but she brushed it off because she loves the fair, the girls were having fun, and we had tickets for the monster truck show. Halfway through the monster trucks, there was an intermission, and I took that moment to say, "Nope, we are leaving now, not going to argue about it, it's time to leave now." It was a 25-minute drive home, and by the time we arrived home, it was already on the news, the local paper's website, and all over Facebook that there had been a gang-related shooting at the fairgrounds in the concessions area we had to walk through on the way out. Huge police response. M's extra. It happened probably less than a minute after we had gotten to the car. We didn't hear the shots. We never told our daughter, but needless to say, my wife trusts my gut now. The feeling started in the car and grew stronger as we approached the fair. I can say to the best of my memory, I spoke up before we even entered the gates, and the feeling grew stronger over the course of the next 4-ish hours we were there. We went on rides, saw animals, ate all the food, etc. But as the monster truck show went on, it got to the point where I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. One of you is correct in your guess about where and when this took place. The USA is in obvious need of more sensible gun laws. Seeing the amount of places people have said this has happened somewhere else makes me sad. Story 4. I was in Barcelona with some friends, ended up in a pretty local bar and having a few drinks with the barman. He talked about another bar and said he'd take us in a taxi as he was finishing soon. Got in a taxi with him and started to drive a long way, started to get rural, and I asked him how far. He just laughed and said something in Spanish to the driver, who laughed as well. We stopped at some traffic lights and I pushed my two, a lot drunker than me, friends out of the car and told them to run. Found another taxi luckily and jumped in. Taxi driver was surprised as us. We were miles from anywhere we should have been as tourists. He was on his way home but took us back to the city. Story 5. In high school, we were eating at a Burger King. A friend kept saying it was too hot inside, let's leave. No one else felt like it was, but she insisted. We all walked outside, and about 20 seconds later, a car smashed through the restaurant where we were sitting. Story 6, 1991, first Gulf War. I was 9 years old. The first night they started air raids, my older brother woke me up telling me to grab my glasses and run to the basement. Keeping a hold of those glasses became the most important thing for me to do ever. And since Story 7, my family was crossing the English Channel on a ferry, it was 1979. My brother, then aged 11, and me, then aged 13, got bored sitting around a large lounge with our parents, so we wandered around looking at stuff. This guy approached us and asked if we were Canadian. I was wearing a t-shirt from the Canadian Embassy Club in Moscow. We said we were, and he said he was too. We chatted a bit about where we were from. He looked like he was in his 20s. I can still remember his shoulder-length hair and his 70s mustache. He told us he had bumper stickers on his car, which was parked several levels below us. He invited us to go to his car and see the stickers. We both said no. We kept chatting, and he kept trying to get us to go down and see his car. It was getting really creepy, so I grabbed my brother and said we were going to go have dessert with our parents or some lame reason. We told them what happened and hung around our parents for the rest of the evening. I couldn't figure out why he was trying to lure us to his car. Story 8. When my husband and I were teenagers and first started dating, we were parked in an empty golf course for some privacy. We had been to this spot before, and it was a great place to walk around at night and then make out in the car. Tonight was different. As soon as we pulled in, something felt wrong. I reclined my chair back to hide myself, paranoid someone was watching us. We sat for a few moments, making awkward small talk. I was suddenly filled with overwhelming dread and sheepishly asked if we could leave. My then boyfriend immediately obliged. A little too quickly, considering the hormones of teenage boys and the plans we had to fool around. He peeled out of the parking lot. My seat still fully reclined, because at this point I'm absolutely convinced we aren't alone. The bottom of the Honda SC is. The ditch of the driveway as we pull out in a panic. At this point, neither of us had communicated with one another what we were feeling, but his reaction was enough to know we were on the same page. We were in danger. We speed a few miles away before we broke the silence, and I put my seat back in its upright position. I tried to laugh it off and admitted I wasn't sure why I was scared. Neither of us really had an explanation for the sudden fear we both experienced, but decided not to question it too much. We found out after the fact there was a brutal attack on a couple teens walking home from the burger joint by the golf course by a schizophrenic homeless man. I'm convinced we both felt like someone was watching us because he was, and I know if we had gone on our normal late night walk, something horrible would have happened. This happened almost 16 years ago, but I can still remember that fear so vividly. Story 9 was camping at a national park with 2 friends, 3 of us in a tent. One of those spots that you drive up to and has a picnic table and a fire pit, so it's not deep woods camping. Middle of the night, I have to pee. Go out to a nearby spot and do my business, no problem. Walking back, I stop to look at the stars and light a cig. I'm there maybe a minute or two when suddenly I had a wave of what I can only describe as primal instinct. My adrenaline sharpened everything as I listened. Nothing had changed, no sounds around, but I just knew something was there and was watching me. I calmly put my cig out and walked back to the tent without any sudden movements. Got in the tent and waited, listening. There was nothing, so I figured I must have spooked myself out. Went back to sleep without issue. In the morning, we found our camp spot absolutely destroyed. Some animal had come through looking for food, I guess, but not messed with the tent, thankfully. Even my friend's old baseball hat that he had been sweating in all summer was ripped to shreds. We found pieces of it all over. It had been sitting on the picnic table. I know to listen to my gut from now on. Story 10. Sat in a pub in London with my friend debating getting one more beer before heading back to my house. He really wanted to get a half, but I had this unbelievably strong feeling that I had to leave right then. It was like a tangible flood of pure anxiety to the point where I thought, this is really ducking weird. I just said to my friend, nah, I'm good, let's go. We caught the bus just outside the pub and went back, no problem. 2 days later, he messages me, holy crap, look at this article. That same bus stop 30 minutes later, a homeless man randomly attacked a woman waiting for the bus and stabbed her repeatedly to death. If we had that half, it's almost a sure thing we would have been right there where that lady was at that time. Could we have prevented it if we were there? Would one of us have died instead? Was that why I had that weird feeling? I can't explain it, but it chills me to the bone. Story 11. We were camping. It was the dead of night, and I was sleeping. I was maybe 12 or 13. My brother comes into my tent, whispers to me that we have to leave while picking me up. I don't question it, and I just go. We drive for a bit until he pulls over and makes a call. He tells the police that a man was walking around our campsite with a gun, threatening to hit us. We found out later it was his girlfriend's dad. Fun times. Story 12. It was just before Christmas, and me and my then boyfriend, now husband, had gone back to my hometown to visit my family. We'd gone out for some drinks, us, mom, and my sister, and we bumped into some woman who lived on my mom's street. She insisted on inviting us to the after party after the pub kicked out. Mom got super excited, wanted to go, sister said no, and went to bed. But we were both forced, guilt-tripped into going because Mom didn't want to go alone. We get there and go in through the front door. I immediately beeline to the back of the house, the kitchen, and just have this pit of my stomach feeling to scope out how I'm going to get outside again. There's a set of keys next to the fruit bowl, and one of them fits in the back door. I'm saying over and over that I don't want to be here. I want to go home. Mom is telling me to mingle and relax and have fun and not ruin this for her. And husband is starting to pick up on what I'm feeling and wants to go to. Mom has just made us all drinks and is starting to head back towards the living room when we hear the front door slam open, a guy shouting and demanding payment for substances, and everyone else starts shouting, swearing, and screaming. Needless to say, I was straight out the back door, followed by husband and Mom. We were there for about 30 minutes in total, and it wasn't until we got back to safety that I felt like I could breathe again. Story 13. On a trail in the Great Smoky Mountains. I can't recall the actual trail, but something like Indian Grave, and out of nowhere, we heard this noise that we thought could only be made by a large, severely injured cow. All three of our faces drained of color, and we booked it out of there. Later, we were sitting in a restaurant in Dollywood, and via YouTube, we found the source of the noise, a baby bear. I've never heard that noise before, or since, but my heart missed a beat that day, and something deep in my animal brain knew to leave that location immediately. Story 14. When I was a kid, my mom fell into a marriage with an abusive man. He never laid a finger on her while they dated, but he beat her on their wedding night. We'll call him George. We had moved halfway across the country with him, and he made a lot of money, so my mom didn't need to work, which meant we were properly trapped. She didn't have access to his money. All we had was her car. I was about 8 years old at this time. One day, while he was at work, we packed up the car and left him behind, driving back across the country to the city we were in prior. When we got back into town, we checked into our hotel and went to sleep. Sometime the next day, we went to my mom's favorite hangout restaurant bar spot. My brother, 17 at the time, we'll call him Matthew, was a bit psychic, IDK if you think it's real or not, and we were just hanging out having a good time when he suddenly knew that George was near. He grabbed my mom's arm and said, "We have to go now." Mom didn't want to go, thought Matthew was just scared, etc. He basically had to drag her out of there. We got in the car, and as we were sitting at the exit of the parking lot waiting for traffic to pass, so we could pull out, George pulled in. Terrifying. Story 15. I was staying over at a friend's house for the first time. Her dad took us to a gas station and I grabbed some candy and went to pay, and he got angry. Not like jokingly angry, but actually offended I was going to pay for my own stuff. After that, I felt something was off and let him pay for my stuff begrudgingly. Before night, I just couldn't shake how uncomfortable I was. I kept thinking I was super sensitive, but I still called my parents and convinced them to pick me up. Come to find out, the guy was a pedo. I found out a few months later that he had abused her and her sister, and she invited friends thinking it would spare her since he would focus on her friends instead. I'm now a mom, and I just feel so angry, but also pity her so deeply. She was willing to sacrifice her friends to spare her and her sister, and has to live with that now. Story 16, Woolsey Fire, 2018. I evacuated our family at 7:45 p.m. amidst heavy smoke and wind. Official evacuation order came at 2 a.m., by which time fire was everywhere, power was out, and roads were gridlocked. Story 17. This was 4 years ago, right after COVID. Went to a well-known Cancun all-inclusive resort on vacation. It was super early morning, just past dawn. Had the infinity pool to myself and took advantage. Wandered to the infinity edge, which looked out over the beach and ocean. I'm there at the edge, enjoying the view when motion below me caught my eye. Two guys were below me, behind the hotel sign, digging in the sand. They pulled up a box, a little bigger than a shoebox. Something told me not to move, but also not to look. I shifted my gaze, feeling oddly both calm and terrified, so that I was looking at the horizon, like I hadn't even noticed them. My peripheral vision confirmed they stopped digging and were looking up at me. Nobody moved for a few minutes, then they went back to their work. I slowly glided backward away from the edge, then out of the pool and swiftly back to our room. Later that morning, as drinks and loud music got into full swing, 3 police officers came and were investigating the spot that they had been digging. I am positive my ability to look like I was just a dumb tourist enjoying the view kept me from becoming concerning to them. Story 18. Not really a scary one, but this past summer, me and my family were at the fair and this guy kept running into my grandma. My grandma was 79 years old at the time, I might add. We were just going through the fair and at 3 different times throughout the day-night, this guy just kept happening to find where we were at. By the 3rd time, we said, let's go, because this guy was clearly stalking us, or more specifically, my grandma. Why? I have no clue, but we weren't going to stick around and find out either. Story 19. I have told this story to friends many times before. I am a female mountain guide. About 10 years ago, as a recently graduated mountain guide, I decided to go on a solo approach to where I wanted to set a base camp to climb a mountain in the Darwin Range, South America. I'm being purposefully vague. The first part of the hike shared a known multi-day hiking trail that sees some traffic in the summer. It's quite a remote area though, so not a lot. And at some point I was planning to cut north and thread my own way to where I wanted to go. I was planning to stay 2 nights scoping the area. It was winter, by the way, so I wasn't expecting to find anyone even on the hiking trail. It had snowed the day before, so I was opening trail in mid-calf snow, which wasn't a problem. About an hour in, I got joined by 4 stray dogs. And after 3 hours, 2 of them were still with me. Goldie and Blackie, my naming skills are basic. Maybe 5 hours in, I'm sitting having a snack and a group of 13 men, age range 25 to 55, catch up to me. We make small talk and they are doing the multi-day route. I don't specify where I'm going. I was only about an hour and a half from where I wanted to cut right and doing really good time, so I decided to chill quite a bit on my pace after that. 1 hour later, I stop in a big opening for lunch. The group catches up and decides to also stop there. I was eating some bread and cheese, which I had finished, and 1 mandarin. The group had leftovers from a barbecue, Goldie and Blackie stayed with me the whole time and didn't beg any food from them. In fact, when one tried throwing a bone, Blackie growled and the hairs on his back stood. Boy, I got this immediate feeling I had to get out of there right then. I mean, any stray dog choosing to beg for an orange instead of a bone? That's weird. But since the trail was fresh, I didn't want to go first and show where I was going with my steps. So I let them go first under the excuse that they would pack the trail for me and make it easier for me. The whole time, the conversation is pleasant and there's nothing outwardly weird, at least from the people I'm talking with. But I can't shake the feeling. So when I knew I was close to the cutting point, I fell back from the group and without saying bye or anything, just cut from the trail. I walked another 2 hours to the base of the mountain I was scoping and set my camp in an opening, hidden behind some bushes. It was still quite early, and I had plenty of time for exploring the next day. Honestly, I felt a bit silly for not even saying anything and just vanishing like that. That night, Goldie and Blackie are still there with me, but temps were cold, about 14°C, but next to the sea that is so cold and humid. I felt bad for the dogs, so I let them into my tent with the flap a bit open so they could do their business. 3 living things inside a tent was a lot warmer than one anyways, but I stank of dogs so bad afterwards. We shared some dinner and went to sleep. About 2 a.m., they start growling bad. I don't know these dogs, and it kind of freaked me a bit because I didn't want to get bitten, but they were growling to something outside the tent. No big mammals in that area. Maybe a fox, but no animals I should be worried about. I shortly considered turning on my flashlight and having a look, but again that gut feeling stops me. I had a big hunting knife, but I know that nobody wins in a knife fight, let alone the 48kg small woman. The 2 dogs leave the tent in a chase, growling and barking, then return and lay next to me again. The situation happened once more at about 2:40 a.m., and then no more. It wasn't my most restful night. I want to clarify that whole time there weren't any yelling of my name from anyone that could be part of a concerned search party. In fact, there were no lights at all. I peeked outside without my lights on. If there had been lights, I would have seen them. It was a clear night. In the end, I fell asleep and assumed it had been a poor fox, and the dogs being territorial of their new pet, me. Well, next morning I find 2 tracks of snowshoes that followed my trail from the main trail and walked all around the area I was, but never too close to the tent, probably thanks to Blackie and Goldie. I went over it so many times over my head, but if it had been people with good intentions, there would have been lights, calling out anything, but there wasn't. Who retraces their steps to find a young woman alone in the woods in the middle of the night without announcing themselves with good intentions? So it wasn't that they saw me vanish and got concerned about my well-being. It's so scary to think what could have happened to me if Goldie and Blackie hadn't decided to follow me. I went back home the next morning and ended up climbing that mountain later in the season when a friend came to visit. The dogs weren't actually strays, more like free-roaming farm dogs. Blackie and Goldie followed me all the way back to the house they had come from the next day, and I would love to think that they are still there today, getting treats and chasing off bad guys. Story 20, 13 years ago. At the beach parking lot where everyone came to hang out as young adults in the summer evenings, something just came over me. It wasn't dread or fear, but something just felt off. Overall, a bad feeling. I've never experienced anything like it before, but my gut told my brain that it's time to go home. Honestly, it wasn't strong enough of a feeling that I could have easily changed my mind due to my lack of fear. Not sure why, I just have never been an incredibly fearful person. I said to my friend at the time that I am leaving, something feels off here. I get home, and less than 2 hours later, a gang shooting happened at the beach. Unfortunately, a few friends from my old high school were hit. Fortunately, they survived. They weren't the target, just wrong place, wrong time. Luckily, I left because I was about 6 months pregnant at the time. Who knows what could have happened if I stayed. Story 21. I lived in Philly for a while, around COVID times, and my job had me traveling to all different parts of the city as a job coach. I worked with folks with physical or developmental disabilities, went to their job sites to make sure they were getting accommodations, being treated fairly, and helping them build skills to work independently. Sometimes it would bring me through a part of town it was not great to be through as a lone person, especially because I had a pretty sizable chest and hips and not a lot of height. I was getting out of a site somewhere in Kensington, late afternoon. I was checking my phone for transit when I started to get antsy. I've been anxious before, cautious and all, but this was a whole new level. I was starting to shake from the dread, but the street was pretty empty. After a few seconds, it just seemed like I started moving involuntarily, started to walk fast away and down the street. Turns out, a guy came out of the overgrown lot I was next to and started following me, shouting at me to come to him, calling me a Karen, threatening me for being there. Luckily, I happened to pass a halal food truck, and the chef decided to jump out with a duck-off big knife and started yelling at the guy. Guy had a knife of his own, but didn't think it was worth it to pick the fight, I guess, because he backed off. I was too shaken up to ask the chef his name, but he stayed out of the truck with me until an Uber came. like hell I was going to venture off on my own again. He didn't speak English, and I don't speak Arabic, but I know the kind tone to know he was trying to comfort me. Even gave me a lamb gyro for the road. He saved my life, and I wish I knew his name. It wasn't the only time I was saved by strangers in Philly either. I have to thank the POC community specifically for taking care of my ass, because I never got help from the white folk when it came down to it. Here's to halal chefs, street corner guys, subway ladies, shopping cart retrievers, and the one guy who caught me by the backpack so I wouldn't fall down a flight of concrete stairs when my knee gave out. Kept me safe. Story 22. My family was living in South Sudan during the Civil War some years back. I remember waking up to shooting all around our house and in the village. Once it died down, the whole village left and went to the refugee camps in Uganda. We followed them and moved to Uganda as well. It was a very scary and traumatizing time. Story 23. Wife and I did a road trip down south in New Zealand to a place called Akaroa. It's a cute little French town on the east coast of the South Island. We're fans of hiking, so we parked up at a nearby forest trail and started our walk. It was like 3 p.m. in the afternoon on a beautiful sunny day. But we didn't see a single other person on this track. We're very used to bushwalking in remote places, but at some point during this walk, I felt goosebumps and a sense of dread. It was very weird. I haven't felt like that very often. I noticed there were no birds chirping at either, which felt very odd. It really felt like someone was watching us. At some point, I told my wife I don't like this feeling, and I think we should cut our hike short and get back to the car. We both hurried back. Still don't have any explanation for that day, but I can very clearly remember how I felt. Everything in my body was screaming at me to just turn around and get back in the car. Story 24. In February 2022, when a neighbor country invaded and began bombing, my world collapsed. It was the scariest moment of my life. The moment we realized we had to leave our home, maybe forever. I don't think I've ever faced a harder decision or felt such fear and uncertainty. And even now, nothing has truly changed. We've returned to our home, but we live under the shadow of constant, unpredictable bombing, trying to hold on to some sense of normal life in a place that no longer feels safe. Story 25. It was getting late, so we were heading back to Bangkok on the train. We get off where we think is our train change station. It wasn't. It was a very run-down shanty town, entirely made from sheet metal. We had a while to wait for next train, so thought we'd wander around anyway. Every single person staring at us. Don't think they had many tourists in this town, that's for sure. Also, lots of deformed dogs with tumors, scars, skin issues, and bits missing from their bodies, hanging around but kept to themselves. Anyway, it's starting to get dark, so we start heading back to the station. Oh crap, where was it? Everything everywhere in all directions looks the same. Not a landmark in sight, all just sheet metal huts. Anyway, not the end of the world. We have a little time, but it's getting darker. We ask a few people, and they seem to point the right direction, so we make our way. Almost dark now, not much lighting in this town either, and also most of the people have disappeared from the streets. It had become a lot more eerie. Surely we are getting to the station soon. Well, those dogs at night do not keep to themselves. We hear scuffling, fighting, squealing. Dog wars. There is dog wars in the streets. Seems to be two groups of deformed dogs against each other. It's a sorry sight, but we carefully just keep moving. Surely we are nearly there now, though we are moving a bit slower because now it's pretty dark and those rabid dogs could be anywhere. I think I remember this spot. A girl asked for a photo there not long after we got off train. This must be the right way and we're almost there. What is waiting for us on the found path? A giant group of rabid dogs. There were 4 of us, so they were being cautious. But the dogs were getting a bit cocky. We slowly move, with them following behind, barking getting more intense. They are getting more cocky and running past closer. We pick up bricks from the floor in case and essentially walk backwards, facing the dogs as they confront us with barks and drive-bys. It felt like a long time, but eventually we see here is a light. Finally, we are at the station. The dogs seem less interested here, probably because locals are more frequent here, and probably throw rocks at them here, like we may have had to just do. But wait a second, why is the station now padlocked? There is no coming train, holy crap, what do we do now? We averted the dogs, but are now stranded in shantytown in the middle of nowhere, and leaving this little area probably means more rabid dogs across from the station are metal shanty buildings. Though it seems like dwellings/businesses. Maybe we can ask if we can just pay $100 to anyone for a ride. We knock on a house, and a very skinny, dazzled man opens the door. Of course, he speaks very little English. We auto-translate that we need a ride. We'll pay a lot. He says to come in. Why did we go in? The putrid smell of whatever meat he had been cutting and the lack of any furniture was worrying. He speaks into the Google Translate. Instead of, yes, I know a guy with a car, he says, we must sleep here tonight. No thank you. We said thank you and left. Though he was not happy at all, which was really creepy. Anyway, we are like duck. Maybe let's knock on a fancier sheet metal house. And this next one had music, and the smell of food here was good. We knocked, and my God, was I happy to see a big, jovial, colorfully clad woman who had kids. She spoke perfect English. Well, maybe not perfect, but very good with zero hesitation. She said she knew someone with a truck and they could take us. We didn't even discuss money, though we did say we would pay. This kind man drove us for a whole hour to a nicer town with hostels, and he didn't even ask for money. We had to force it upon him. The end story 6. Climbing a 12,000-foot mountain, and suddenly the horizon turned black. Then the black began getting closer. By the time we got back to camp, there was lightning, flash flooding, and hail everywhere. Story 27. I went to a house party in college with a group of 5 other friends. It was hosted in a lofted apartment, and the whole drive there, I kept saying we shouldn't go because I just had this horrible gut feeling something bad was going to happen. An hour after arriving, mid-beer pong game, there was a loud cracking noise and the floor gave out, similar to the way the Titanic split in half. Myself and the group I went with all fell 12 feet to the concrete floor below, along with the folding table and a bunch of glass bottles. The only people hurt? Myself and 2 of my friends. I remember looking up once I hit the floor and seeing the refrigerator about 2 feet from falling down on top of me. I think I said, "I told you so," for the rest of the year, haha. Story 28. 10 years ago, I'm 20 and in Jamaica, on vacation with a huge group of multiple families celebrating a wedding. One evening, all the adults, 40 and up, are outside our hotel drinking, and me and 2 of the other young girls go to walk the beach. They are both a little younger than me. Anyway, we're a few hotels worth down the beach when we are approached by a Jamaican man. He starts off casually chatting and is soon pointing down the coast towards the downtown scene. That is the real Jamaica. You have to check it out. I immediately know that he's trying to get us to a second location. I abruptly tell the girls that we should turn around and walk back towards our hotel. He keeps pace with us. I tell him we don't need a chaperone in a very stern tone. He sort of laughs and says he doesn't mind and keeps walking with us. I should point out that the other 2 girls, being younger than me, were both uncomfortable, but still stuck in that mindset/conditioning that being polite is tantamount, and they were still trying to keep the peace and chat with him. I was so ducking over it, though. We are finally about at our hotel, and he's still with us. At this point, I'm firmly and loudly telling this guy that we have super close by adults who will be wondering where we are. We are at our hotel, and we aren't going to a club with him. Like, I'm pretty loud and insistent. We are approached by a dude who looks young, probably the age I was, 20. White, looks like a tourist. For a moment, I felt relief. He heard me, saw what was happening, and was stepping in. Then he shakes hands and gives a quick bro hug to the Jamaican dude. Oh, duck. That moment, I felt fight or flight. It was time to go. He introduces himself, and before I have time to react and assert myself, the 2 of them have 1, tied Rasta bracelets to our wrists, and 2, pulled out 3 red stripe bottles and uncapped them, handing 1 to each of us. In regards to the bracelets, I vividly remember looking at my wrist and thinking, they've marked us. White dude is chatting with the youngest of us 3, a doe-eyed blonde, and nervously laughing and going along with what he's saying. I step back for a moment and say to the other girl, very firmly, we need to get the duck away from here. White dude pauses in his friendly convo for a split second to make eye contact with me, and his mask slips for the tiniest second. Pure hatred. At this point, I'm finished letting the other 2 girls play pretend polite. I grab both of them, turn around, and yell super loudly behind us, "We aren't interested, go away!" Like I said, the rest of our group wasn't far. They were drinking less than 50 yards away. I'm not sure how our story would have ended had I been more naive, but I'm also not interested in knowing. Story 29. 5 years ago, my BF and I decided to go wild camping without a tent in some beautiful hills. Left the car at the bottom and hiked 40 mins up. We found a nice place under some trees and set down our bags. Then BF realized he had forgotten his phone in the car. Usually not a big deal, but he'd left it in the sat-nav holder so it would be clearly visible, and he didn't want anyone who saw it to smash the window, so he went back to get it. I stayed on the hill exploring around, but when I saw him walking up an hour later, I ran down a bit to meet him. Just then, we saw some cows coming across towards us. I really love cows, so I thought it was cool. They came closer and suddenly started bucking and kicking at us. Turns out this was a field of young bulls. It was genuinely, absolutely terrifying. They surrounded us and were trying to barge us and turning around to kick in our faces. My BF started screaming at them and yelling at me to run. I was wearing flip-flops, so I kicked them off, and as he distracted the cows, I ran across the hill barefoot. BF was shouting to find a cattle grid to get safe. I ran around the corner and collapsed, crying, because I seriously thought my BF was going to be lost. Cows hit many people where I'm from, but till now, I'd always thought that people had been trampled while they were running. not that the cows had actually attacked them. I sat there for 10 minutes, waiting. Luckily, I had my phone and was about to call for help when I saw BF running down the hill towards me. He said they had circled him and he found a branch on the floor and kept them away with it. He said when he stood still for a while, they stopped kicking and he extremely slowly backed away till he could turn and run. They had followed him, but he'd got to the cattle grid in time. We were in so much shock, we just wanted to go home, but our bags were still on the hill. Luckily, BFD had his car keys from going back to get his phone, so we cut through some brambles to get back to the car, and my housemate let me in. My keys were in the bags. We slept till 5 a.m., then drove back, and BF crept up the hill. He made me wait at the bottom of the cow field, but I couldn't see him. Suddenly, he came rocketing around the corner with the 2 bags and the cows behind him. They were less interested at 6 a.m. in the morning, so weren't running fast, so he got back safely. We never went into a cow field again. We often talk about how crazy it was. Like how many things happened that probably saved us. We could have been lying down in our sleeping bags when the cows came. Then we would have run and left the car keys in our bags and been stranded. They could have come and attacked me alone while I was waiting for BF to get his phone. I think BF forgetting his phone saved up. He reminds us of this when he forgets stuff. So crazy. Always be wary of cows, my loves. Story 30. In 2008, in college, my friends and I broke into an old abandoned hotel from the 1930s in Mineral Wells, TX. It was straight out of a time warp. Out of, I believe, 12 floors, we made it to 3. We went up past the pool. Apparently the hotel was famous for this because of the minerals in the water that supposedly cured illness. Around the kitchen and massive ballroom floor, past the old elevator with the pull gate, were lots of old creepy bedrooms with furniture still in them. Then we heard a noise, a super loud screeching noise, down a hallway that was pitch black. We all shined our lights in the direction. Saw nothing, but the sound was getting louder and louder. We all bolted as fast as we could. No clue what it was, but I've never been more terrified in my life. Story 31. Vacationing in Mexico. I was young and in my 20s and like a git decided to go to a casino outside the resort. It looked like a scene straight out of GTA. They took our licenses before entering and we had a hard time getting out. Story 32. My husband and I went on a road trip across the province last year. And on the last part of the trip, we booked a hotel for the night because we were too tired to drive. We checked into the hotel, went to our room, and I immediately felt uncomfortable. Something just wasn't right. Went to use the washroom and the toilet over. Flowed so much that it went past the bathroom and into the bedroom, so we switched to a different room. There were some drunk people out back, blood on the ground in front of our door. We could hear women screaming in the woods behind the hotel, and we saw some guys pull up into a van and unloading hundreds of boxes into the room next to us. I started crying and said, "We need to leave. I don't care that the room was already paid for, and I don't care how tired I was. I was driving the rest of the way home, 9 hours. A week later, there was a news report of that hotel being used for trafficking women and substances. I'm so glad we left that night. Story 33. I had been staying at my boyfriend's at the time house and needed to pop home to grab some more clothes. As soon as I got inside, I had this overwhelming feeling like the house didn't want me to be there. Nobody was home. It was dark and silent. I ran upstairs, grabbed whatever was closest, and got the duck out of there. I remember standing in the driveway looking up at the house with the most immense sense of dread I've ever had. 1 week later, we had my 21st at home. A few strange things happened. One of them being when my sister, cousin, and I were doing our hair, and I smelled what I thought was smoke. My cousin insisted it was just the straightener, so I let it go. Then my grandmother asked if I was cold because it was winter and my dress didn't have sleeves, we were inside, and if I should put the heater on. For some reason, I decided not to, which was very unusual for me. I always have it on in winter. While this was all happening, one of the downlights in the main room started flickering, which it had done periodically for a few weeks, but we never thought much of it. Later that night, when all the guests had gone and we were in bed, I woke up to the smoke alarms absolutely blaring. I remember being in denial and tried to tell myself it was the house alarm. It sometimes went off by itself. So I tried to key in the code, but nothing happened. Then, accepting that it was in fact the smoke alarm, I went downstairs thinking, where is this fire? There's no fire here. Sure enough, when I got down there and went to the main room, where all of us had just been, I looked up at the ducted heating vent and saw bright orange flames just frolicking around. It was unreachable. It spread between the 2 floors and melted a water pipe, making water fall out of the ceiling, which made no sense to me at the time, as I just could not process the danger I was in. We all got outside, including our 2 dogs and some guests that had stayed. We saw the whole house burn down. There was an explosion when it reached the gas. I have never felt such intense, acute terror since. Later, when the engineer inspected it, he said it started from a faulty downlight and had been smoldering for at least a few days. That explained the smell when we were doing our hair. It explained the flickering light. And if I'd turned the heater on that night, It would have ignited with all our guests inside, and who knows what would have happened if I did. So, my house burned down on my 21st. We lost everything. Story 34. Two buddies and I had just graduated university and were out on the town one night bar hopping. We were feeling no pain from a night of drinking, and while walking back to my apartment at the end of the night, we spotted a pretty wild house party happening. Music playing, people hanging out in the front yard, and the front door open. We walked over and started talking to some guy out front. He invited us in and we found some beer in the kitchen and started to drink. My one buddy started playing beer pong with this group of women. They had never played before. We were having fun, but the conversations I was trying to have with these people just seemed off. I finally asked the guy that we had first met out front if he went to the same university we had just graduated from. He looked confused. He then told me that he was in high school. I laughed it off. No way. And as I looked around the house and at the people there, I had this panicked realization. We were officially at a high school party. How did we not realize this walking in? My heart sank and I suddenly felt sick to my stomach. Here we were with a house full of underage teens drinking in a stranger's house. I felt like I was going to puke, grabbed my buddies and yanked them out of there. Thankfully, nothing bad happened and we got out of there. But to this day, we still laugh about this drunken mix-up. Story 35. Took a train and bus trip around Ireland in '78. Was going into Sligo when I had an instant feeling of overwhelming dread, something I'd never had before or since. It was heavy and oppressive. I just grabbed my stuff and ran across the platform to get a train going right back out. I ended up in Mullingar, where I had a great stay and dinner with people I met at the B&B, so maybe that was what was supposed to happen for me. I have never been able to figure this out. Story 36. Back in college, a group of friends and I were working our spring carnival. The night before the first day opening, we had the job of setting up several spaces and worked until like 2 in the morning, putting together booths and tables and whatnot. It was crazy cold that night for the area of the country we were in. No snow on the ground, but icy and teeth-chattering cold. We were done with our work and just about the only people still there at the fairground when one friend was like, "Come in here and warm up," through the flap of a mostly sealed food tent. I went in and found a group of us drinking beer, stretched out on the tops of tables, surrounded by gas grills that had all been turned on full blast to warm the little tent up. A couple of my friends were practically passed out. We'd been working hard. They had a couple of beers, and it was so nice and warm in the tent. After only a few minutes, I too was feeling super tired and a little woozy and stretched out on a table. The tent got very quiet, and I rolled over to tell a friend that we probably shouldn't fall asleep in here. And then I saw it. The air was wavy like a mirage in the desert, and there were 6-7 of us laid out straight on tabletops with arms at our sides like bodies on morgue slabs. All I could say was, "The gas, get out," over and over as I struggled to open up the tent flaps. Once the cold outside air rushed into the tent, a couple of the others sat up, realizing what was happening. We all stumbled out of the tent. The two who had been in there the longest ended up going to the hospital, while me and the others just had varying degrees of nausea, headaches, and vomiting. I don't think college me really put it together in the moment that we had built ourselves a carbon monoxide gas chamber. But when I had looked over and saw us all stretched out on tables like that, there was a very calm voice in my head that said, "This is how they'll find our bodies." And it freaked me the duck out. Story 37. This wasn't me. It was my friend who was scared, but looking back, it was appropriate. I grew up in a very quiet suburb in Orange County, CK. My cousin, who lived in Los Angeles, invited me to come to her house for her birthday. I bring my best friend with me, and we're both thinking we'll meet some cute girls from LA. We get there early, and people are just starting to come. As we're trying to just get acclimated, a group comes to the house, and it includes guy and girls. Again, we're from the OC. We don't know anyone. I also had an older boy cousin who was the brother of my cousin who was having the birthday. He was maybe early 20s. He discreetly motions for me and my friend to follow him. We walk into his parents' bedroom, and I see my uncle there. Right then, my uncle plops down on the bed like 5 handguns. My cousin says one of the guys is from a rival gang than some other guys, and they are worried that something is going to go down. I remember both my uncle and my older cousin saying, "Hey, Phoenix 1230 and Phoenix 1230's friend, grab a gun because we think something might go down." I was just trying to process, but my friend's eyes were basically bulging out of his sockets. He says, "Phoenix 1230, can we go talk over here?" and pulls me to the corner. He looks at me and says, "We need to leave now." I am in 100% agreement. I go tell both my uncle and cousin that we need to leave, and they both look at us and agree. We walked to my cousin, who was still just talking to her friends like it was nothing, and told her we had to go home because it was a long drive back. It was maybe like 7, but she looked and said, "I get it." Ultimately, nothing happened. But looking back, it was a wild experience for 2 kids from the OC. I still remember the sound of the guns when they were plopped on the bed. Crazy MO. Story 38. Not really scared, more like a nope moment. I drove for Lyft off and on for about a year. This was in Charlotte, NC. I took on a ride that was in an outlying neighborhood at the airport. So I go to the address and it's on the road with a few houses, all dark. Streetlights were few and far between. I get to the address and I can't find any house numbers. I pull into the driveway that's listed, wait not even 30 seconds, and get a feeling something isn't right. No house lights come on, no message or call asking to wait. I don't see anyone, so I back out and leave. Right as I get to the end of the street, I get another ride request for the same location. I declined and got out of there fast. Walking home one night, I tried to take what I thought was a shortcut through an industrial park. I lived in the area my whole life. I knew there was a way through, but couldn't check as my phone battery was depleted. So I'm walking in what I feel is the right way and get towards the edge of the industrial park. The road keeps going, but there are no streetlights there. The road looked like a fairy tale description of what you expect a dark tree-lined road would be. That feeling of a bad idea to travel down that road was so overwhelming that I went back and took the long way home. Story 39. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and my younger sister was about 6 or 7. We spent our summers at a campground where we had our trailer on a seasonal lot. It was a pretty safe spot, lots of kids, lots of parents or retired adults nearby that would look out for said kids. We didn't have cell phones, and there was no cell service at the campground anyway, but we weren't concerned when our parents went 15 mins up the highway to go fishing and left us kids more or less unattended. My sister and I were walking back to our campsite, which was near the back of the loop. It was a round dirt road with campers and tents on either side, as well as in the middle. We were about to take the short way through the loop, go up the straight main road, turn into the back of the loop, when I saw an older man watching us through the campers and trees on the other side. I quietly told my sister to not panic, don't look at him, but we'll take the long way around the full loop to see if he was trying to follow us. The guys switched directions and started heading down the loop where we'd cross paths. So we cut through a campsite where an older man and his wife were out having a fire. We didn't know them, but we said hello and carried on towards the back of the loop. The guy following us stood and talked to the man at the fire, all while watching us walk around the loop. We decided not to go back to our own camper since our parents weren't there, so we took another couple detours and went into another girl's camper. Her family wasn't around that weekend, but they left their camper unlocked, so we snuck in and locked the door. Since this camper had a good view of the whole loop, we stayed until long after we watched the guy walk away after he couldn't find us. We don't really know what he wanted or why he was following us, but he wasn't subtle about it. And we didn't really leave the camper until my parents came back in their car. We didn't tell them what happened either. Oops. It was scary as an 8-9-year-old trying to be cool and calm for her younger sister, and to not piss off the guy following us through the trees, but maybe not so scary now as an adult. Story 40. I was traveling through Malaysia with some friends, all girls in our early 20s, in the late 2000s, and we had a really long travel day trying to get on this island where we had hotel reservations. We just happened to be traveling on Chinese New Year, so the bus from KL took hours longer than scheduled, and we arrived well after the last ferry to the island. It was after midnight, and not knowing what to do, we just sat at the bus depot for a while. We finally decided to see if we could find someone with a boat to take us over. Since it was New Year's, there were still a bunch of people milling about, and after the longest travel day, we weren't really thinking straight. Finally, my friends come back with this guy who says he can borrow his friend's boat. Everyone's excited. After a bit, his friends show up in 2 black cars and say they can take us to the boat, but we have to drive there. My friends all put their bags in the trunk and get in the cars, but when it's my turn, my hands just won't let go of my bag. I get this sinking feeling in my gut that this is the start of something really awful. I refuse to put my bag in and inform my friends that I'm not getting in. They get immediately pissed at me because this is our solution to this long and awful day, and I'm not offering any other solution. This is pretty out of character for me. I'm usually the peacekeeper and go along with anything, but this was the first time I had a clear feeling that I needed to not just go along with the group and the plan. I convinced them to get out of the cars and get their bags. I'm looking in the distance and see a sign that looks like it could be a hotel, so I convinced them to just walk over with me and see if there is a room. We lucked out and they had one crafty room available. I slept on the floor. My friends continued to be mad at me for a bit, but with the unknown of where those men would take us once we got in the cars, I wasn't willing to risk it. Story 41. Picture it, early 90s, hanging out with a girl I knew from middle school at her house. Her mom was at work, but her stepdad was home. He didn't say anything that was weird, but his presence just bothered me. The way he looked at both of us, and the way he just lingered. Fast forward to later that evening, and it was time for me to go home. It was the 90s, so it was, my mom said, I could go to her house if her parents would drive me home situation. Her mom had just gotten home and was tired from work, so the stepdad, overly eager, announced he would drive me home. He told his wife to relax and don't worry about it, that he didn't mind at all taking the drive. I had a huge knot in my stomach and immediately begged the mom to please take me instead. He drove an 80s creeper van, and his excitement to drive me home made my skin crawl. After some back and forth, her mom agreed to drive me, and I felt so relieved. Needless to say, I never went back to her house after that. Now, 20 plus years later, she talks about her abuse and advocates for mental health stemming from childhood trauma on her social media pages. I'm so glad I trusted my gut at such a young age. Story 42. Climbing a glacier. It's a beautiful day, but we can see clouds on the other side of the mountain, and it sounds like thunder. We get close to our destination, about 100 from a rock face we need to pass through, and clouds roll in fast. The temperature drops and we can't see the rock face we are going towards, so we take a break to see if it blows through. One of our group went up the hill a bit to relieve themselves, and suddenly a bolt of lightning hit the rock face, arcing across the gap we were planning to go through. Skidded, slipped, and rolled down the glacier to get away from. Story 43. When the Virginia Tech shooting happened, my own college in Southern Maryland went into preventative lockdown. My best friend and I snuck off campus to go to the mall anyway. We weren't trying to be careless, we were troubled. Staying in our rooms watching the news was painful. Staying in and not watching the news felt impossible, so we didn't stay in our rooms. Stupid, but I think understandable. We were in Walden Books trying to distract ourselves when I heard a shout and looked out into the mall to see 3 or 4 teenagers running the same direction past the bookstore, and my brain immediately went into fight or flight mode. I grabbed my friend and dragged her into the back of the store, through the employees' only entrance, and into a bathroom. I locked the door and we crouched on the floor in the dark for 5 minutes. I called my mom on my flip phone because I was convinced that we were in a mass shooting situation. Literally nothing was happening. I was just on edge from a bunch of kids my own age, in a similar situation to my own, being hit 300 miles away. I've been in a few potentially life-threatening situations since then. I was in Sudan teaching English when riots over rising prices broke out, and was shoving my students onto buses at the school's back door while tires were being set on fire at the front door. But while I was aware of the possibility that things might go badly in those situations, that was the one time I really thought, things are actively going very badly right now. Story 44. Camping alone in the Himalayas, 2 a.m. I woke up to the sound of someone slowly walking around my tent, dragging what sounded like a metal chain on the rocks. Every step circled closer, then stopped right outside the flap. Dead silence for 30 seconds, then a man's voice, calm and clear. "Are you awake?" I grabbed my knife, screamed, "Yes!" and started unzipping the tent to fight. The footsteps instantly sprinted away into the woods. Packed everything in 4 minutes, left half my stuff, and hiked 6 kilometers in the dark to the nearest village. Still have no idea who or what it was. What's the fastest you've ever noped out of a situation? Story 45. My now ex-girlfriend got invited to a get-together at a really fancy McMansion. The people who invited her were her gal pals she met during a brief unemployment stint. It was a couple of acres of land with pools, jacuzzis, outdoor bars, grills, etc. Being an outcast, I never networked with anyone from town and had little knowledge about anyone's business. Anyways, we show up because she insisted. After arriving, something seemed strange. Our host immediately seemed to be checking us out and discussing things about us. We were given very strong alcoholic drinks, and throughout the night, butlers and waitresses keep trying to get us to take off more clothes with every drink. Eventually, I find myself in a bathroom with a stranger telling me that he can't wait for the noob group sex, which is where I realized what was going on. Long story short, I had to drag our drunk asses out and drove away until we were close enough to book a hotel room. Story 46. In my early 20s, first car. Myself and a friend went to a house party held by people that we knew well. The party was great, high vibes, and everyone was having a great time. Out of nowhere, I was overcome with a feeling of absolute dread, like a sense of impending doom that was totally impossible to ignore. I told my friend that it was time to go, now. He looked me in the eyes and didn't hesitate. He said, "Okay, let's go." We both got in our cars and drove away, and when we rounded the corner out of the street, we spotted about 15 cars all parked up on the side of the road. Turns out a local gang who were notorious for crashing parties and literally kidnapping people and torturing them, all sorts of terrible crap like that. This gang had found out about the party and were waiting down the street to raid it. After we left, we heard that the gang had crashed the party, bashed as many guys and girls as they could, kidnapped a couple of people, and even ran over a partygoer as they drove away. A powerful lesson at a young age to trust those gut feelings. Story 47. In Madrid, with my strawberry blonde classmate, who looked like Bond girl, but with a pixie cut, milky skin covered in strawberry blonde freckles, and wearing short shorts with a tiny t-shirt that was basically a tank top. She refused everyone's advice and concerns about her standing out as an obvious tourist. It's a very busy area, and we are desperate for American food. We're looking for a fast food chain that we heard about and we turned down a side street to get to the door. Side street turned out to be an alley, and suddenly we are surrounded by a group of young men talking really fast. The guys are flirty and giving compliments. My friend is flattered by the attention, giggling and batting her lashes, but I immediately clocked that they are moving us away from the street of people and trying to separate us from each other. I go nuclear. I start waving my arms around and I get loud. I grab her and start dragging her back to the street. She's pissed. I'm pissed. We're still hangry. She was a typical small-town, spoiled, self-absorbed, naive girl. She believed love was waiting for her and had found her in that alley, and she refused to acknowledge the danger she put us in. Her git never forgave me for saving our lives. Story 48. I was working in a mall when I was 19 years old, and I remembered one day I was walking to the food court to get something to eat when I heard a gunshot. Everyone stopped for a second, even me. Then people started running towards my direction, and that's when I realized that was an actual gunshot, and I had to get the duck out now. So I started to run and left through the emergency exit. It turns out it was gang on gang, but Gitis chose to do it inside of a mall. Story 49. Was solo traveler one evening in Vietnam, Saigon, maybe 20 years ago, walking relatively late at night. Somehow find myself being invited into a small store. It was a few steps up off the street, very empty of product, and just a handful of mid to older men sitting on milk crates playing cards. Was quickly seated and began being fed multiple shots of whiskey. There was an undercurrent of aggression, despite everything outwardly facing friendly. The old man sitting next to me was captivating my attention, felt evil, and had this long thumb fingernail that he was jabbing into my kneecap and thigh, trying to explain the game, while others were starting to lightly huddle on the other side of the shop, talking and glancing my way. At the opening to the store, one of them gentlemen stood and put his hand up to grab the roll-top steel door, like a garage door, but for tiny shops. It was solid, so one quick pull, and I was behind doors. Gut reactions had mounted enough evidence, and I grabbed my bag and jumped out of there in a second or two. Looked back, but heard the gate slam down when I was further into the street. These moments can be common when traveling alone and not being too cautious. Maybe it was a harmless game of cards, and I was being paranoid. I'll never know. But I am glad I didn't wait around to find out. Story 50. My girlfriend and I were hiking Mount Carlton, 800 Lane, when all of a sudden, our phones started sending multiple warnings of a tornado in the area. Reception is terrible there, so we only got the messages closer to the top, and for a usually busy hiking area, it was eerily quiet. The top of this mountain has a lone fire watch cabin from many years ago, and a 360-degree view stretching miles of land in a national park. This is a spot where people would usually relax after the long hike and take in the sights. While taking in the sights, we could see clouds forming in areas and another warning sent to our phones. We were already on high alert, but this was our, yep, let's get the hell out of here, as we started our trek down the mountain into a more wooded area. The sky all of a sudden turned pitch black, and the loudest snap of thunder we've ever heard came just from above us, giving us a nature jump scare. Seconds later, pouring rain came down and turned our trail into a small river covering our hiking shoes. Soaked to the bone, but happy we were getting closer and closer to our car. A hiking trip to never forget. Story 51. Walking my dog years and years ago at our regular spot and time in my neighborhood. After work one evening, we were on the sidewalk in front of the school in the neighborhood, and he was sniffing around, and something in my gut internally screamed, "Cross the street right now." I have learned to listen to my gut with things like that, and we immediately crossed the street. 30 seconds later, a car came flying down the road, hopped the curb, took out a street sign, went down the sidewalk for a few feet before going back on the road and driving off. Had we not crossed the street, they would have plowed right through us, probably killing us at how fast they were going. Story 52. After COVID started my hubs, and I would go to the lake more often. Even in the cold, rain, snow, one day I was standing on the pier like I did a million times, and there's these metal bars that jut into the water, like stabilizing the concrete like a partial ladder without rungs. I'm staring straight down into the water. There's no barriers, nothing preventing cars or people from going off the edge. The concrete pier just ends and it's completely black water. So I say, "Don't you wonder how many people have driven off here?" Spouse laughs at me and was like, "No one." Also, why would you say that? I kind of backpedaled because I didn't want him to think I was being dark of paranoid, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. A day or two later, they were pulling the car of 2 missing people from the spot I was standing in, with said car pictured on the front page newspaper and a diver between the same bars I stood between. There are barriers there now. Oh, and I had taken a picture. The calm black water, a bit of concrete pier, and the bars are all pictured, but my feet are out of frame. I still have witch IDK if it's creepy or just memorable because I didn't feel scared or have the we should leave feeling. I just felt strongly something was down there. I've looked at the pic a million times, and you truly can't see anything, which makes it oddly more uncomfortable. Story 53. My fiance and I were outside on a warm summer night standing behind a cabin watching the most amazing electrical storm I'd ever seen. The back of the cabin had a large cornfield there, so our view was unobstructed. Where we were was completely peaceful, just a slight breeze and no rain, no thunder. It was so mesmerizing that other people came to join us in watching this event. Every second there were just multiple lightning strikes over a large area. During this spectacular show of nature, I felt the hair on my body raise. I turned to my fiancée to tell her we need to leave now when lightning struck a tree very close by. The thunder cracked and brought with it very strong wind that immediately started bending all the trees violently. I yelled for everyone to get into the cabin as lightning again struck close by, cracking the air again. We all ran inside as the rain began to blow in almost horizontal. When we opened the door to the cabin, the wind rushed in, and all the windows that had just the screens at the moment allowed a current of air to flow through and blew out the shutters. As we all entered into the room, another crack of thunder preceded the lights going out. We huddled in the room while the wind, rain, and thunder continued to hammer the cabin and trees. Once the storm finally subsided, we went outside to survey the damage. Trees had been ripped out of the ground all over the place. Roads were blocked. Power was out everywhere, due to downed line. One cabin had a tree that fell onto it, but the person who was supposed to be in there had been with us in our cabin. Story 54. 2017-2018, London. I was in a relationship of about 2-3 years. It was a habit that on joint rare days off midweek, different stressful jobs, both self-employed, we would sleep in, get lunch out somewhere nice, then walk in a local park to walk off some calories before heading home for ice cream and Game of Thrones and Narcos era. This day all going well, we were nearly at the gates to a central London park. All of a sudden I had an intuitive response that we shouldn't go further, but was so scared I didn't explain, just tugged on his hand and tried to yank a person with a 50 subs weight advantage plus 10 inches in height. He jokingly tugged me the other way. Then I turned into a stubborn golden retriever and just planted myself. Looked at me as if I was nuts. We wandered back about a 20-minute walk, bit awkward, but I explained once we were further away from the park that something spooked me and I was utterly terrified. Home, I went for a shower, as was covered in cold, clammy sweat. Dressed in comfies, came into the living room. The TV was on, news channel. A man had entered the park with a long kitchen knife and hit 4 or 5 people, including nearly lost one. Went in via the same gate we were a few hundred meters from. I'm usually very logical, articulate, rational, and can only say thanks to whichever ancient human sense, pattern recognition, or intuition that saved us. Story 55. We had a house fire in the early hours of the morning. Our 2-story house had the laundry below. It was an open-air ground floor, with a chest freezer that rats decided to nest in. They chewed the wires, causing a short circuit with their bedding becoming the fuel. My dad saw the wisps of smoke through the upstairs kitchen window and thought our brother was having a shower. When he went downstairs, his bedroom door was still closed and noticed the distinct smell. Dad did the worst thing possible. He kicked the door in and immediately caused a backdraft situation. The fire began to rage, driven by the sudden surge of oxygen. We all awoke to Dad's frantic yells of "Fire! Fire! Get out!" My brother's room was right next to the laundry, but separated by a concrete block wall. He was the first out and was perfectly fine. My sister got out quickly, which was lucky because her room was directly above where the fire was burning. It destabilized her wardrobe, which fell onto her bed only a few moments after she got out of the house. Mom and I were the last out. We blindly made our way out of the front door, trying not to breathe the hot, acrid smoke, not being able to use the handrails of the stairs as the fire had heated them up, feeling our way with our bare feet, running across the lawn and ignoring the bindies that ed and stuck into our feet. Story 56. I went to a music festival alone. After it ended, I was looking for an Uber to take me back to where my car was parked. While I'm waiting for the Uber, a random guy pulls up and says, "Do you need a ride?" I wasn't thinking straight. I was extremely drunk and assumed he was the Uber, and I got in his SUV. While he was driving, he kept making innuendos, telling me how attractive I was and asking me how I was going to pay for this favor he was doing for me. My spidey senses were going off like an alarm. Luckily, he had to stop for gas. Once he went inside to pay for the gas, I opened the passenger side door as quietly, slowly as possible, and basically barrel rolled out and ran to a dark corner. When he came back, he was extremely angry and looked for me. He gave up after a while, which felt like forever in the hiding spot, and sped off. After waiting 10 minutes for my heart to stop beating out of my chest, I called an actual Uber and made sure to check the license plate first. Story 57. When a very old mafia-adjacent cab company owner pulled a revolver out of his desk in a damn business meeting while threatening to hit me and my boss as his 3 sons lurched at him to get control of him before he pulled the trigger. Good times. Additional context, he was eating a salad with a ton of dressing as he worked himself into a rage. Then salad and dressing started spraying out of his mouth as he yelled and filed through multiple drawers looking for his gun. Honestly, the salad situation bothered me way more than the gun did. I felt no danger at all, really, until my boss grabbed me and said, "We need to leave now." All of a sudden, I realized, oh, this is bad. I'm not claiming to be brave. I just like to argue and apparently have no survival instincts. Story 58. I was in an old apartment building visiting a friend. We were just sitting on the couch when we heard a sound like tearing fabric, only 10 times louder. Then we saw a massive horizontal crack instantly appear and run across the ceiling above us, showering us with dust. My friend just yelled, "Out, now!" and we bolted. It turned out the main support beam above their unit had given way slightly. We stood outside shaking for an hour, watching the emergency crew work. Story 59. I was a kid meeting my father downtown. Mother was driving and picking him up. She accidentally turned down the wrong street. 6 guys approached the vehicle, and Mom started freaking out, throwing the car in reverse. They obviously were selling and didn't get aggressive. I remember thinking they looked safe-ish, but my mom was scared out of her mind with little me in the back. We didn't score any cool substances, but got out of there and found our pickup soon after. Story 60. Walking around the streets of a local shopping district with a friend and her 2 sisters. I saw the same car pass us a few times, then it started doing weird stuff like driving slowly past and making weird turns. I've had some crafty things happen to me in my very early years, and I was in a near state of hypervigilance by this age. So I was the only one clocking it. I didn't want to scare the younger girls, but the last time the car came up behind us, all my alarm systems started firing. I told them all we were being followed and to run into a store as fast as they could. The car sped up and tried to intercept us, but we ran through a thick garden and managed to get into the store. The younger girls were crying hysterically, and the older manager went out the front to confront the man, but he saw the car speeding off. The cops were called and then our parents. Cop told my mom that the car description, which I still remember now almost 25 years later, matched other claims of abductions and abduction attempts, and they had been warning local high schools and youth clubs centers about it. I never got the number plate, unfortunately. Story 61. So my house is about 12 kilometers away, passing very silent plantations. From my high school, and normally I go back home for lunch. Before the extracurricular time started, school ended at 13 and extracurricular started at 1500. Usually I go back home with my friend, but at that time I feel very scared on going back home, so I successfully bugging my friend to not go back home early and wait like 30 more minutes. There's robbery in the middle of the road we passed like 15 minutes before we reach that part, and the guy robbed gets his hand slashed. Like, no more hand slashed. Thankfully, he's alive, but seeing the blood smeared everywhere on the road churns my stomach. That delay I did might save our life. Story 62. I was sitting in my car after high school one day and feeling like I needed to stop texting and leave. Then I started seeing people running down the street towards me. 3 or 4 people on each side of the street towards me. I bug out and drive like 5 blocks away to call 911, and then I can see that they have guns and are threatening or hit each other. So then I drive off a second time and don't stop. But I almost got caught in crossfire twice in 5 minutes. Story 63. Smoking massive amounts of substances at a friend's apartment in the 90s. One of his neighbors called and complained about the smell, and he laughed it off. A few minutes later, the management office called him to give him a warning, and he tried to laugh it off again, but something told me it wasn't just a warning. And as soon as he hung up, I said, "We are going to a movie right now." I had never been the leader of this group, but I said it with such authority it still surprises me to this day, and all 4 of us immediately packed up and hopped in my car. Right after we pulled out of the parking lot, 2 police cars pulled up to the front of the building. The neighbor had called them anyway. People told him later they hung out for almost an hour waiting for us or him to come back. I made sure we were gone for over 4 hours. Maybe not the scariest story here, but I've still never been arrested, and I'm certainly glad I wasn't that day either, because it was close. Story 64, Hurricane Katrina, I suppose. I lived in Biloxi, Mrs., and our house was on a golf course. The water flooded the house a little lower than us and eventually reached our place, and it was starting to pour in. My dad decided it was time to go outside to go sit in our Jeep because it's higher off the ground. Our neighbors saw us outside and had us come walk over to their place because it was built on stilts. I had a hard time walking due to the wind and needed to be pushed. The water rose up more, but luckily not too much higher. One of the people that had escaped their flooded home and was there with us apparently passed away the next day from inhaling the debris. Story 65. We were on the Indian coast when the tsunami hit. The waves rose like a wall, roaring and unstoppable, and we ran for our lives, terrified we wouldn't make it. Story 66. I had a few, but the one I can't explain was when I was riding my bike to the shops for food and some beers while on vacation. Weather was pretty bad, but still rideable. On the way there, nothing felt off other than me being wet as hell and the bike not liking the wet. On the way back, I got a crazy urge to just whack open the throttle and get it over with. Not something I'd usually do in the dark and rain on roads I don't know. But honestly, going 15 over the speed limit felt too slow. 2 days later, the weather cleared up, I rode the same road, and there was a 10-kilometer pass stretch that had fully flooded, trees uprooted and trash in the branches at 2-3 meters high. I'm not from a place with flash floods at all, and this area had never been prone to them before. I'm guessing the preceding drought dried up the ground, and instead of seeping in, the water washed away a natural dam. What I don't get is how I felt it coming while cold, sleep-deprived, and on top of a very vibrant motorcycle. Story 67 was staying at an eco-resort on a reserve in the Daintree Forest, far north Queensland. Some of the most beautiful environments you could experience, but is what gives Australia its reputation. Everything in the water is trying to kill you, from jellyfish to crocs. Where we were staying had its own private swimming hole, where the water was significantly cooler, a river feeding into the ocean. Unbelievable swimming spot, surrounded by tropical rainforest. The owners told us it was too cold for crocs. The second time we swam there on dusk, I got an eerie feeling and had to get out of the water. My partner kept swimming, determined to enjoy our last moments at this amazing spot all to ourselves. I watched him like a hawk, praying he would remain happily swimming about. He did, and we had a great trip. Ever since, however, we've seen increasing news reports of crocs showing up in unexpected waters, and particularly spots they've never been seen. When we think about that swim spot now, we both shudder. Even my partner, who is a risk taker, admits we were tempting fate a little too much. I still recall the silent, heavy feeling of being watched. It gives the chills whenever I think of it. Story 68. My father's story, not mine, but still. He was working in construction as a contractor, leading a team who were working on an old estate on a hillside. It was a clear day, weather was fine, and they were up there on the scaffolding working on the chimney. Rather suddenly, my father experiences this pressure to go down right now. It's a hassle. You have to climb down this scaffolding. They hadn't been up there all that long, so he resisted for a bit. But it was just this tremendous push, this urging to descend ASAP. So he told his team to go down. They asked why. They didn't understand. They were in the swing of things. Why go down? My father finally just ordered them down. So they went, and a few minutes later, they all stood on the lawn, looking at one another sheepishly. At that moment, completely unexpectedly, a lightning strike hit the chimney they'd been working on. When he told me the story hours later, he was still upset. Story 69. I was in high school when we had the Tohoku earthquake in Japan in March 2011. I lived in Mie Prefecture at the time, so luckily far enough from the tsunami. But the earthquake was still strong enough that we had to evacuate the building. All cell phone data was offline, so we had no communication with our parents and no idea if there was a tsunami coming towards us. I could see the ocean from my school's building. I only got a taste of what the people closest to the epicenter must have felt like. And let me tell you, it was terrifying enough. I hope to never experience that again in my lifetime. On a lighter note, I'm proud to say that while staring at the face of such catastrophe, my community's first reaction was not to hoard all the toilet paper that could be found. Story 70. Years ago, I had flown home to Denver and took the shuttle to the parking lot. There weren't a lot of people on this shuttle, but there was this one guy who kept asking me questions, some semi-personal, and I couldn't wait to get off that shuttle and get away from him. When the driver stopped at my area, I stood up and then the guy stood up and got off the shuttle. I had a really bad feeling in my gut, so I stayed on the shuttle and rode it all the way back to the terminal and back to the parking lot. The driver asked me why I didn't get off the shuttle, and I told him about the guy, and I had a bad feeling in my gut about him. And he said, always believe those gut feelings. When we finally got back to my area at the park and ride, the shuttle driver waited until I got into my car and backed out before he left. When has a gut feeling saved your life? Story 1. Lump in my right breast. 43 years old. Clean mammogram. 5 months earlier. I just knew. 4 different doctors told me it was nothing and to come back in a year. I did not and found a 5th. Yeah, I had to argue my way into being diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of breast cancer. On the bright side, Thursday was my 5 years all clear date. Story 2. I was like 8 or 9 when my parents took me and my younger brother to stay the night at my paternal grandparents' house because they were in the middle of divorcing. They lived in a farmhouse that was connected to a barn with machinery, gasoline tanks, and hay on the ground floor and furnished rooms on the floor above that. And the room we were supposed to stay in was in that barn. As soon as we went into the guest room, I was overwhelmed by panic and felt really dizzy. I turned around and just said that we will not sleep in that room, and we spent the night on the couch in the living room instead. Later that night, a gas leak in the barn ignited, and almost the entire barn, including the guest rooms on its top floor, exploded. Maybe I had that weird feeling because the gas had leaked into the room already, but no one else felt anything, and I'm sure I would be dead if I hadn't noticed it. Story 3. I was at a pub party being held for my boyfriend's father, but I had a headache that wasn't going away. I had been drinking, but I wasn't drunk. I was just feeling like crap. So I made my excuses and left to walk home alone, as I didn't want to ruin his night with his dad. It was a 10-minute walk, if that, from the pub to our house, and it wasn't properly dark yet. I walked down the street and passed a man sitting on a wall drinking a beer. A minute after I passed, I heard the bottle smash and then footsteps a little while back. Nothing unusual. It was a main road and there was another pub further along. But something in my gut was screaming. Something was wrong. So I hurriedly walked to the pub and stopped outside to ask the smokers for a light and a chat as I smoked. I watched him pass by me and then stare at me from across the street for an uncomfortable amount of time. With my gut screaming at me, I asked a bouncer working the doors if he could order me a taxi. A few weeks later, while in the town center, I saw a mugshot of the same dude wanted for abuse. Story 4. When I was around 18, I was on a back road with some friends and a girl I didn't know was driving really fast. Now I'm a bit of an adrenaline addict and I have always enjoyed a calculated risk in the name of a good time. But on this occasion, I told her to either slow the duck down or let me out. I literally had to start screaming at her before she listened and slowed down. A week later, she crashed on that same stretch of road at 90 miles an hour, killing her and the 3 passengers of her car. Story 5. Don't know if gut feeling or lucky coincidence. Decided I should empty the bin on my way to uni, which added maybe 10 seconds to my journey as the skip was 10 feet from my front door. Began my walk to uni and roughly 10 seconds of walking in front of me. Some idiot from the 3rd floor flat threw a load of glass out his window, smashing all over the path. Story 6. There was a guy in college who was really into me, and he seemed fine on the surface. Very sweet, always helpful, and wanting to do things for me, but my gut said this guy was bad news. Well, later he went to prison for beating up his girlfriend. Story 7. Went to go catch the bus, saw the bus about to pull out from the stop, and I could have made it if I ran. Something told me not to catch it and just wait for the next one, so I did. Caught the next bus, half an hour later. Now, I usually sit at the back of the bus on the driver's side, so that's where I sat. A little way into the journey, traffic was slowing and we got to the cause of it. A lorry had crashed into the bus I had missed, right into the back on the driver's side. Had I caught that bus, I wouldn't be here. Still gives me chills after 6 years. Story 8. I was staying at a friend's house, out in the country. He was asleep in another room. I was dozing off with his gigantic pit bull Isabel, sweet girl. In the middle of the night, I'm awoken by sounds outside, like scrabbling. Izzy leaps up too. Looks at me, then the back door, and growls. My friend at the time had a young daughter, 4 or 5, so I immediately think of her. I grab the nearest weapon, which is a fire poker, and go to open the door as Izzy is beside me, seemingly ready for a fight. But it didn't feel right. I instead bar the door best I can and creep to a window looking out. Outside is a gigantic bear, so big it could easily can hit me, and it has a few cubs in tow. I watch as it ambles off. I am pretty sure that if I had charged out of that door as I originally intended, me and Izzy would not be here today. Story 9. I was taking my mom to a follow-up appointment from back surgery the month before. The freeway was closed due to a car accident, and Life Flight was called to transport the people injured in the accident. The highway patrol was funneling everyone off of the freeway to the right side exit. I had the strongest feeling we needed to move to the left farthest lane, so I did. No more than a minute after I moved over, a garbage truck came barreling down the freeway and crashed into the car that was in front of us in the other lane so fast that it lifted the front end of the truck and it landed on top of the car. We were in a tiny sports car that would have crumpled like a tin can under the weight of a garbage truck and definitely would have hit my mom and me in a second. For clarity, the sports car was a 1999 Mercury Cougar. I'm 5'9" Swede Spaniard mix. It was tiny for me. Story 10. I was asleep one night and woke up really having to poop. While I was pooping, an earthquake hit and my dresser fell onto my bed where I would have been sleeping. Don't know if I would have died necessarily, but that gut feeling definitely saved me. Story 11. My mom knew something was wrong with me when I was younger. DRs didn't want to see me for another 2 weeks. Mom went into a blind rage over the phone, telling them that she was taking me to get checked whether they liked it or not. We got to the GP. He puts a stethoscope on my back and smells my breath, then says, "We need to get him to hospital now." Turns out I have type 1 diabetes, and if I'd waited another day, I would have died. The breath part is due to the buildup of ketones in the blood, as I was in the severe stages of diabetic ketoacidosis. It smelt like apples. Story 12. A few years ago, I was at a bar with a couple of friends. All was good. We were drinking and having fun. All of a sudden, we heard this discussion taking place just a couple of tables from us. 2 guys decided to have a shouting threat match. I stopped everything to pay attention to them. My friends were making fun of me, saying I was gossipy. One of the guys in the discussion got up and left. Immediately after he left, I told my friends we had to go. Now. Let's GDFO now. They didn't get why I was like that, but I'm their friend since forever, they reluctantly agreed. We went to a different bar in a different neighborhood, but I couldn't take my mind off of those two guys. The next day, the news were talking about a bar fight. Apparently, the guy who got up went home, grabbed a gun, and came back for a drive-by. Hit 4 people in the process. My grandpa taught me to never ignore my gut, and I couldn't be happier to have listened. Story 13, a few weeks ago. I had just left my apartment complex and was heading to a friend's. I pulled out of my driveway and up to the traffic light and stopped. I was in the left turn lane. Light was red. It was late out and there weren't many people on the road. I watched as the light went yellow and then red for through traffic. One guy ran the tail end of the yellow like usual. My turn. Light goes green. I have an arrow blinking for me to turn left. I looked both ways and there was no one around, and I just didn't go. I cannot explain what happened, other than something inside me just said, don't go. So I sat there staring at the green light. A couple seconds later, a car came screaming through the red light, through the intersection, probably doing about 100 kilometers in the lane I would have been turning into. They were going so fast their vehicle had a bounce to it. If I had turned, my car would have been destroyed, and me along with it. I sat there through the whole next light cycle, and then turned, pulled over, and called my sister. It was a ghostly feeling. I am a light jumper. I look both ways, but I'm impatient, and I cannot explain what stopped me from going the second that light went green, but I'm glad it did. Story 14. A pain in the lungs when I inhaled. I've never been hit, don't know what it's like, but the pain should have been equal to it, if not worse. It had happened before, years ago. Some hot water in the shower, and the pain was gone. My wife, then girlfriend, insisted on going to R. I insisted on hot water. I feel like we should go and see a doctor, she had said. I was diagnosed with pulmonary embolism on both lungs. Doctor said 1 or 2 more hours and you were gone. So yeah, I owe my wife one. Story 15. It didn't happen to me, but was told by my mom. When she was pregnant with my older sister, her and her family decided to go hiking in the mountain. On the day of the hike, she suddenly felt discomfort and unconformable. So she stayed behind while the rest of her family went for the hike. Her family got lost, and if it wasn't for my mom staying behind, they wouldn't have gotten help. Keep in mind that there was no cell phones back then, so if you got lost, it was a lot harder to contact rescue workers to find you. Funny enough, my sister was also born during an earthquake. Different story. Story 16. I was driving a friend home late at night when I was around 21. She lived in a pretty rural area outside of St. Louis and Mo, and about a quarter mile from her house was an old abandoned farm and farmhouse. I always thought of this place as non-threatening, as she told me she and her 2 sisters would go there as kids, and they found an attic full of cool things, including a trunk of vintage women's clothing and old love letters, like something out of a movie. Anyway, I'm driving her home, and it's a hot, humid Missouri summer, and we have the windows open as the late night had offered some cool air. We are also singing at the top of our lungs. We pass the abandoned farm, and I drop her off at her house. I wait long enough to see she makes it inside, and I head back out the way I came. I'm driving along, and I get to almost where the farm is, and I see 2 things in the road. My danger meter goes off as I had just driven this road, and there was nothing there. I put the windows up and make sure the doors are locked. I got closer, and I realized the items are 2 car batteries, spaced out in the road, which was basically a 1-lane road, in a way that I would have to get out and move them to drive on the road. I immediately knew I wasn't getting out of the car, so I picked the side of the road that had the lesser ditch, and I gunned it. I was driving a little SUV and remember feeling the car run over branches and things in the little ditch, but I just gunned it and got out of there. All the way home, I felt creeped out and kept checking my rearview mirror. I called my friend the next morning and told her what had happened, and we both agreed it was weird. Shortly after that, I moved to another state and didn't think much of it after that. Fast forward to 2-3 years later when I was back visiting my hometown. I randomly ran into my old friend, and she ran up to me with wide eyes and grabbed my arms. She asked me if I remembered what I told her that night. I said yes, and she proceeded to tell me that not too long after that had happened, her family was awakened in the middle of the night to someone pounding on their sliding glass door. Her dad went to check and saw 2 naked, injured women and let them in and called 911. They had been abducted from St. Louis City, about 40 minutes away, by 2 men and brought to the old abandoned farmhouse, where the men beat them. The women somehow managed to get free and ran to the only light they could see, the light over my friend's garage. They survived, but the men were never caught. There was evidence the men had been going there for a while. My friend was convinced they had put the batteries in the road to lure me out of the car. I'm just really glad my gut told me not to. Story 17. My now wife and I did the long distance thing in college, and I planned on doing my normal routine to visit her. Leave Chicagoland in the morning, get to her early afternoon on Friday. Well, I'm closing my store on Thursday night and get a feeling I should leave that night. So I said F it and left that night. A little after lunch on Friday, tornado sirens go off. I don't think anything of it until I head back home Sunday and drive through a town about half-hour north of her. It got lit up by the tornado. I quickly realized that I had left at my normal time. I would have been smack dab in the middle of tornado. Story 18. I almost got kidnapped once. I was like 23 or so. I was walking down my street at a little after dusk. I saw a van approaching a little ahead, no lights on. Didn't think much of it due to the time of day. The van slowed down and almost started creeping as I was approaching this part of the sidewalk, which had a tall, solid wall fence to a community, and this gave me some pause in that quick moment. For me to keep walking, I'd have to go between the wall and the van, and the little time it took me to take a couple of steps. And as the van was getting close, I noticed that the side door was slowly sliding open. The one thought in my mind was, why isn't the light turning on inside the van? When you open the door of a vehicle, the light should come on inside it, unless you deliberately switch that off. And I just ran to the median. I ran in front of the van and across the street, because if they're gonna have some use of roadkill me, have at it, but they're not getting me in one glorious piece. Immediately, the van took off like someone lit it on fire. From a slow crawl to full speed. As I looked after it to see the plates, I noticed it had no plates, and still no lights. I called the police, of course. They sent cars out and didn't find the van. I never had anything like this happen again, and I'm just an ordinary person, so I don't suspect it was targeted. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Story 19. So in this situation, it was both listening and not listening to my gut. I didn't listen to my gut when it said, don't get into the car with this person you've just met. Well, that went to crap. He legit kidnapped me and drove me to a forest and tried to drag me out. My gut said to calm down and be nice to him. I basically talked my way out of the situation by being kind and stroking his ego. I was able to convince him that he didn't need to do this and that I'd be his, but he needed to let me go because my friend was waiting for me, and she knew I was getting a ride, this was true, and that if I didn't show up soon, maybe we couldn't be together. This guy was crazy, but it worked, and he drove me to where my friend was waiting. The entire time, I had to keep reassuring him that I'm not mad and that I'm happy he chose me, gag. Anyway, I was safe and unharmed except for some bruises from when I tried to fight him off earlier. He's in jail. He's currently in jail, but not for my case. He got less than a year for what he did to me. This was because he didn't seriously injure or manage to abuse me. He served his time and was released. He went back in a few years ago for hit someone. Story 20. I was driving across the country last summer and was behind a guy and something just didn't feel right. He wasn't doing anything crazy, but the way he was driving just felt off. Slowing down randomly and then speeding up a lot to compensate, wobbling around his lane, occasionally grazing the shoulder, etc. two-lane highway. So I'm torn about passing him because A, what if he cuts me off or something while I'm doing it? And B, I don't know if I want him behind me, but also I don't want to be anywhere near him. And passing him and speeding off seems like an okay option. So I see an exit sign and decided I'll just wait it out until then, get gas, and hopefully never see him again. Dude then swerves into the left lane and then into the grass median, across the opposing side of the highway, and off into a field. Dude is still driving through this field as I'm passing. No idea what that was about, but he probably would have run into me as I passed him. Story 21. I get really bad vibes from the car park and work. It's a giant, poorly lit multi-story, and I've seen enough horror films to know I shouldn't be taking it lightly. Whenever I get in, I pay attention to the floors people call the lift to keep an eye on where they're going. One time a guy got in front of me and pressed 6 while I was parked on 8. He didn't get out at 6 and was still in the lift as I got to my floor. I leave, he doesn't, so I guess he's remembered he's on another floor, but just before I get to the dark area with all the cars, I turn back. This guy had waited about 30 seconds, therefore held the lift to wait, and silently emerged to follow me. I just stopped and stared him down. He had a deer in the headlights look and turned straight back to the lift. I have no idea if it saved my life, but it freaked me the duck out. Story 22. I'm almost completely blind, just in case. So one day I found myself playing near our living room. Out of nowhere, I feel this heat near my face and start smelling something strange. Something was just not right. I, of course, go tell my mother, and as it turns out, the heat on my face and the burning smell was our couch on fire. Story 23. A few years ago, I was stopped at a red light around 3 a.m. I had just picked up my BF from downtown. I had a sudden urge to look in my rear view mirror. I did because in it, I saw a SUV that was speeding and wasn't slowing down. I ended up halfway in the intersection to get out of their way. We both would have died from rear impact. Story 24. My ex-husband had a friend who I just didn't like, although I could never explain why. He was very handsome, always smiling, very respectful speech, always called me ma'am or miss, even though he's a few years older than us. My ex used to give me crap for expressing my feelings about this guy. I was never rude to him when he'd stop by, but I did have trouble hiding my creeped out vibe. Fast forward to 3 years later. Guy is convicted of indecent liberties and abuse. Story 25. It was about 2 years ago. I was walking down a main road, and I don't know why, but something told me I needed to cross. I wasn't even going that way, but I just felt like I had to cross. It was quiet, so I quickly ran across the road. Just as I got to the other side, a drunk driver came down the road and hit a light pole where I had just been. Had I not crossed, I would have been pass on impact. Story 26. Always hated the dad scout leader in my area growing up. Just seemed like a real creep. Hated seeing him at community events, soccer games, back to school nights, etc. 10-year-old me staged a hissy fit to end all meltdowns with me slamming doors, crying and breaking crap to avoid being moved from Cub Scouts, where the moms ran things, to avoid Boy Scouts. Turns out the scout leader threatening to hit them if they ever spoke. Justice found him, and he's in prison. Story 27. NSFW story. I'd driven to the city with a friend. I was going through a dry spell, and I'd let him convince me to buy a BJ from this girl he knew of. Not proud of that. Anyway, I'd arrived at the location we agreed on, and I called her. I didn't see where she was, but she said to follow and started walking down the road. I followed in the car and parked on the right side of the road. It was at small intersection, so you could see down the crossroad. She had agreed she'd be getting in the car, but she kept walking. I called again. She walked into a building on the corner, across the road, and she told me to come in. I could tell she was in the doorway, but I had this gut-wrenching feeling that I should not get out of the car. So I told my friend to drive and get us out of there. He gave me crap. I said I didn't care. As we pulled away, I looked back and I could tell she was still standing there, but I saw a couple other silhouettes in the doorway as well. Could have been nothing, or maybe I was about to get robbed and get the crap kicked out of me. Either way, I'm glad I never found out. Story 28. Escaped the abduction of me and my friends thanks to my gut feeling. I was at the mall with my friends, all of us around 12 years old. It was 8 p.m., and my mom was on her way to pick me up. We were all chilling together until each of our parents got here to get us. As we're standing outside of a store near one of the side entrances, a man comes up to us. He's about 30-ish, wearing huge glasses and carrying a clipboard. The man says, "Hey guys, do you want to watch some movie trailers and answer surveys about them? I'll pay you each $5 per trailer." Naturally, my friends are all for it. The thing is, my heart dropped as soon as I heard it. As they're all saying yes, the man nods and then points to the side entrance. It's pitch black outside, and that entrance leads to the back parking lot of the mall, which is always deserted. Then he says, "We can do it over there." My friends start to follow the man as he walks toward the glass doors, and I'm trailing behind them. Then, as we get close enough for me to kind of see what's outside, I notice a van parked right outside the entrance. The headlights are on. The car is running. The back doors seems to be open. Every part of my being screams, "No, don't go!" I stop in my tracks and loudly say, "Guys, my mom is here to pick us all up. I don't think we have time for it." The man freezes and keeps his eyes trained on the doors, and I can see his jaw clenching tightly. My friends look at me with confusion, and I try to give them the most terrified expression of warning that I can. Thankfully, they get the message and say bye to the guy. The man refused to turn to look at us, and simply began to walk outside of the mall. As we're walking away, I turn and look behind me one last time. The van and the man were gone. Story 29. I don't know if this necessarily saved my life, but it did save me in some way, I think. There was a group of friends I had in high school into college who were very open with alcohol, substances, sex. I was always so buttoned up, and they taught me how to relax my spirit, be more honest with my voice, with and without alcohol or substances. I learned how to listen to my thoughts, communicate them clearly, listen to what I wanted, etc. I trusted them, and they seem to have found the magic way between not enough and too much with these so-called illicit substances. When we got to college, a couple of them dropped off the face of the earth, wouldn't answer the phone, disappeared from classes, rumors that some had dropped out. And by the time Christmas rolled around, there was a get-together with the old crew. People showed up who I hadn't seen or heard from in months, and they looked completely different. Emaciated, skinny, waxy hair, dull eyes. Some of them were just not the same. Vibes creepy enough for me to check out of the party real early, before most people had even shown up. People still talk about the night. It sent one guy to the hospital. Another moved across the country to live with an aunt and go to rehab. A woman got in a car crash and lost half her leg. These people who seemed to have been so healthy and safe at once had gone too far and lost the guardrails. I thought they had put up in their own lives. I've always been glad I kept them when I did, and stepped away from them when I did too. Story 30. Listened to my body twice. I started having painful period-like cramps, so I made an appointment with my OBGYN the next day. They immediately gave me an ultrasound and discovered a G-fruit-sized tumor where my ovaries should have been. Certain it was cancer, I was in surgery days later. Thankfully, all the cancer was encapsulated in the tumor, so no chemo was necessary. I did have to go on an estrogen patch, though. A year later, I was sitting in my bathtub and reached out for a towel. Felt a weird pain in my left breast. I knew it was cancer. I immediately pulled off the estrogen patch and then went in for a mammogram first thing the next morning. A few days later, I was having a bilateral mastectomy and reconstruction, which I had insisted on because it was my second cancer diagnosis. The two cancers were unrelated. My doc wanted me to have a lumpectomy and radiation, but I insisted that I never again wanted to have to tell my daughters that I had cancer. After my surgery, my tumor was tested and it was determined to be highly recurrent and aggressive. Even though the cancer had not spread into my lymph nodes, I went through 20 rounds of harsh chemo in the hopes it will never, ever come back. Thankful to say that on 4/20/2020, I will celebrate being cancer-free for 5 years. Story 31. I was 8 to 10 years old, and my 2 to 3-year-old sister jumped in the deep end of the pool, and I jumped in less than a second after, because I had a feeling she would. I jumped into action before the lifeguard even noticed, and before my mom could do anything. And when I got her up, my mom pulled her out. And that's when the lifeguard saw, if he even did. Story 32. I used to date a girl who I would go see every night after I got off work. I worked until midnight. I would stay at her house until about 1 or 2 a.m. Sometimes as I left her house, she would follow me in her car and stop at a nearby all-night grocery store. I always begged her not to, but she always said she'd be fine. Sometimes I would wait in the parking lot until she came back out, and then we'd go our separate ways. Sometimes I wouldn't. So one time I felt ill, so as we left, she said, "Just go straight home. I'll be fine. I always am." But for some reason, I felt like that's the night I needed to be here. She thought I went straight home. I was in the parking lot as she pulled in, but she didn't see me. As she walked in, a shady-looking dude was walking out. She ignored him, but he looked back at her about 3 or 4 times. Then he gets to his truck, and another guy is in there, and they talk through the window for a minute, looking back at the store a couple times. The second guy gets out of the truck, gets something out of the back of it, then they both head back into the store. I couldn't be sure they were going to do anything but hell if I was going to take a chance. I go into the store too. I see them going past every aisle and then motion to each other like, there she is. So I walk a bit faster to catch up. I turn into the aisle just as they are approaching her. They are looking at each other. From behind, I yell, "Hey!" They both turn, and so does my girlfriend. I brush by them and give them a look. I had some muscle back then and was 6'4", and say, "Hey guys." They nod awkwardly as my girlfriend says to me, "What are you doing here?" I kiss her and make up some story about wanting to buy aspirin. The two guys leave. I never told my girlfriend that story. I don't know why. I kind of felt like a superhero to myself. We dated about 2 more years after that. I don't know what they were going to do to with her, but it was nothing good. Story 33. We were driving to a park for the afternoon evening and got this feeling that we shouldn't be on the road. Traffic had been backed up for a while, but I could not shake the feeling. I asked my dad to pull over at the upcoming rest stop. He put up a big stink about it, but pulled over and let me run to pee. We loaded the car back up, get back on the road. Traffic was still inching along. By this point, the feeling had mostly gone away. We were on the road for like 2 minutes before a car going the opposite direction hit a car, sent that car flipping over the median, and took out the 6 cars that were around us when we pulled over. Had we not stopped, we would have been in the middle of that accident. It was terrifying. My parents luckily were able to call for help and had first aid training, so they were able to help at the scene. Amazingly, nobody suffered any major injuries beyond a few eskies or bumps. After that, they never questioned the Lord's influence over the bladder. Story 34. Playing with a friend of mine at the playground. An older man came and asked me if me and my friend would like to play at his private playground. I remembered my mom telling me to not interact or go with strangers, so I declined. I was sure as a kid that he had a private playground and was actually kind of mad at myself for not saying yes. Years later, I was 25 and walked home alone from a club, being tipsy. Suddenly, I remember this man from my childhood, and it occurred to me what that really was. I see in the corner of my eye 2 guys behind me, one leaning on the wall, the other one just nodding and walking out of my perspective. Got chills like crazy. All of a sudden, this dude locks me in his arms, trying to touch me. I said no, he didn't stop. No one was around. So I said, let's just walk, because I was convinced that the other guy was just waiting as well. We walked. He held me super close to him. I asked him for his jacket because I thought I could run if he nestles with his zipper. He just grinned at me, held me even tighter, and didn't say a word. So I felt that I was running out of time, still no other pedestrian in sight. So I relaxed my body on purpose while walking. He sensed it, stopped holding me so tight, so I focused for 30 seconds, and right at the moment, when he looked back, I punched him as hard as I could on the side of his jaw. He fell to the ground, and I ran. Story 35. Was driving to work one morning at about 2 a.m. Was behind a slow 18-wheeler and was getting a feeling I needed to move. As we came up to a red light, I switched over a lane so I wouldn't be behind him anymore. Just about a second later, I heard something that sounded like an explosion, which was a tow truck slamming into the back of the 18-wheeler at about 70 mph, tore off the 2 rear axles on the trailer, and most certainly would have smashed my car to pieces. Story 36. I used to sleep in a basement apartment, And one winter, I woke up in the middle of the night smelling something odd. Opened the windows and didn't think much of it. Come morning and felt really weird. Turns out snow blocked the heater exhaust vent, and carbon monoxide was back feeding into the house. Not as much a gut feeling, but if I didn't open my windows, I definitely would be past story 37. Was offered a trip to a winter camp when I was 9. Felt weird and said that I wasn't going. 2 days later in the news, the very bus that I would have taken to the camp, only one bus was supposed to take everyone to the place, slipped on an icy road, crashed, and got flipped over. Not sure how the kids that were in that bus are today, and I am not sure if anyone passed, but I hope they are okay. The biggest Hugh moment in my life so far. I'm happy that I weren't there, but feel sad for others who had to go through something like this at such age story 38. This isn't really a gut feeling, but when I was 11 or 12 and just started secondary school, I was walking to school by myself, which took around 40 minutes from where I lived, and I noticed a really scruffy man with a beard, camo outfit, and a cap. I couldn't really see his full face, BTW, walking behind me. I got a really bad vibe from him. I didn't know what the duck to do because I was weak and defenseless. Anyway, I decided to see if he was actually following me. My big brain said to go down the cut. As I turned, he did. I started to have a panic attack, and tears came down my face, trying not to make it obvious that I was alarmed. I look at him by using my peripheral vision whilst turning my head slightly to the side, and it felt like my heart dropped and was beating so rapidly out of my chest. I thought this was it. I was going to die. However, I was getting closer to the end of the alleyway as I heard and saw in the front garden of the house. Right there, an old woman, a young woman who was putting a baby in their car. I felt so relieved and happy and turned my head, and the guy was walking away back where he had come from. I didn't tell anyone for months, as I thought I would be grounded or in trouble. I wish I did because he may have made others as uncomfortable as have felt. Story 39. I was at the county fair when I was younger, like 8 or 9. I wandered off from my parents and I had an odd feeling that I was being watched, but I ignored that for some reason. This man had followed me up and down the walkways of the expo hall we were standing in. As he started to get closer, I got this overwhelming feeling of fright. I called for my dad, and I could tell it startled him. He promptly turned and changed direction from me. A really quick thing, but it stuck with me all these years. Story 40. Back in college, I went to a party. A guy was hitting on me. There was something off about him, though. Not necessarily creepy, but just a bad vibe. I turned him down and asked a friend to leave with me because I felt uncomfortable. A few days later, I heard that he ended up taking some other girl home that night and abused her. He soon had charges filed against him. Story 41. Not necessarily life-saving, but still enough to make me think a little harder about my choices. This past winter, during the first week of December, the week before finals for me, I was invited out to go drinking one night. I've never spoken to these people, nor do I drink, so I told them that I'd let them know that night. I got back to my dorm room after my jazz band class and immediately get a case of shudders. I let them know I had to study and stay in. I was just playing Battlefront, but that's irrelevant. And they go out and do their thing. After about 90 minutes, it's now $19.30, I get a knock on the door from campus police. Apparently, someone had decided to narc on the people going to the party. That person was not me, and they asked me where they'd gone. I told CP they'd headed to one of the frat houses and they left, presumably to investigate the party. I go about the rest of my night, not caring about what was happening, and go to bed like normal. I wake up the next morning, curious about what had happened to have campus police called to break up a party. As it turned out, a bunch of people, guys and girls alike, were being roofied that night as an initiation to the frat. Had I gone, I have no doubt I would have been one of the people who were roofied. I'm so thankful for being an introvert. Story 42. I was walking back home from my grandma's, which is across the street from my house. A car pulled up beside me, and as I kept walking, the car slowly followed. When I looked into the car, there was a man about 30s, 40s, who had the evilest grin on his face. His face has never left my mind. As he was slowly coming toward me, his eyes not leaving me, I screamed out help and ran 2 houses down until I saw someone who let me into their house. The man didn't leave until we called the police, and when they came, they searched the car and found handcuffs, blindfold, and a big container with 2 holes poked in the top. Story 43. Not my life, but my cat's. I had a cat who loved getting into things and hiding. Drawers, cupboards, the fridge, anything that was small and dark. She loved it. One day I was doing laundry and I tossed everything in the dryer. Shut the dryer door and pressed the button. It was one of those ones that takes a minute to start. Something didn't feel right. I thought, maybe I forgot to add dryer sheets or something. I turn off the dryer, open the door, and out pops my cat like, "Ha ha, you found me," totally oblivious to what was about to happen. Ever since then, I always double check before turning on an appliance. Story 44. I don't know if it saved my life, but it at least likely saved me from being abused. I was on a popular trail that goes along the river through several small towns. I was on a fairly barren part of the trail, about away between two towns. Tall grass, higher than my head on one side, river on the other. I see a man running solo in front of me. I am a bit faster, so in time, I pass him. I notice that he's suddenly keeping pace with me. He's not falling behind as fast as he should. Instead, he's flanking me, just diagonal to me on the riverside. I get a feeling that with one good push, he could have me in the tall grass and there are no witnesses to see what happened. I give another 10 seconds before I start panicking. Yeah, this doesn't feel right. I whip out my phone and dial 911. I don't push send, but cup the phone in my hand with the screen facing toward him. I otherwise kept running at the same pace, pushing myself to the next town. I notice within 30 seconds that I don't hear him as close anymore. I give it another 30 seconds, counting in my head, then chance a look. He's gone. I full-on stop to turn around. He's gone. The trail is flat and straight in both directions as far as the eye can see. Where the duck did he go in the span of a minute? Either the grass or the river. I can only guess that his reaction validates my feeling that he had bad intentions. This is why I don't run with headphones when I'm running alone, and why I don't trust anyone when I'm out on the trails.